Sarianides, and as always, I'm joined by the freshly arrived back to New England, John Lyons from WEI. John, of course, spent yesterday down at North Carolina observing North Carolina practice. Of course, Bill Belichick going into his first season at North Carolina. John landed this morning. We're usually on at 10. We're a little later this morning, but he got here just in time to do the show. John, first things first, great to see you, man. And second of all, how was your quick trip to North Carolina?
Yeah, well, look, it's Palm Sunday, John, so I had a chance to see New England's football messiah last night in North Carolina, right? So I'll stop the jokes there. But yeah, no, doing well. It was a really, we'll get into it, but it was interesting 24 hours down in North Carolina for sure, checking out the Tar Heels and Coach Belichick.
Yeah, no, and of course, as you mentioned, it was their spring showcase, which is what they're calling these things now. It really goes up my back. I think this weekend illustrates just how effed up college football is right now with all the Nico I stuff down at Tennessee and him demanding more money and them moving on from him. Spring games one of my favorite times of the year, getting to cover them. And of course, me and Kevin were at Boston College yesterday. They also had a practice, basically. They didn't even really call it anything. But schools are now calling these things showcases, not spring practices. And the bottom line is they can say whatever they want. They have to do it this way because of the portal. Portal, of course, opens up on April 18th again. They have to do it this way because of the portal. They have to protect themselves and protect the players they have on their rosters. Otherwise, they risk exposing them to other schools. I thought it was interesting that you said to me before we went live that you thought that the field looked pretty good. Wasn't much of a crowd there. Was a drizzly 52-degree day. The weather has sucked so far this spring. Color me surprised. But you were not impressed with that facility, which surprises me a little bit to hear because you would think that if Bill Belichick were going to go back to college and coach, I should say go back to college, go to college and coach college football, he might pick a program that might have better facilities. It doesn't sound like you were that impressed with the North Carolina facility.
Yeah, so the field itself, the new grass field is terrific. The weight room looked good, but I thought it would have been a little bit bigger, but still it looked good. But the stadium itself, you could tell is in need of a lot of work, whether it's and some of it's just like the seats, the concession stands, the bathrooms, even the stairways were kind of uneven. And I know that sounds like minor stuff. I get it. But when you're competing for recruits with Clemson and Miami and FSU and all these schools with big budgets and a lot of money, that is probably, I think, the next step for them, maybe this offseason. So let's say Belichick stays there. Well, they're paying him. They improve the NIL fund, which is the biggest thing, and they're paying the assistants a bunch of money. So I think the next step, if he's there a year from now or 2 years from now, I think you're going to see those facilities upgraded because it feels like from the coaching staff to the way things are structured, they have that big time feel, even that quasi pro feel. It's just the facilities aren't quite up to that level yet. Just from and I didn't see every single facility, but just from what I saw.
If he stays, I'll believe it when I see it. I still don't think he's going to stay there long term. I still think ultimately he wants to come back to the NFL. I think he's going to try to make that play. Of course, the NFL draft is 11 days away, which is hard to believe. It's a week from Thursday in Green Bay. And of course, as always, like everybody else in this market, we'll have full coverage for you at New England Football Journal. But we're inching one step closer to the NFL draft, John. Another busy week up at Gillette. The Patriots had media availability on Tuesday and Thursday last week. They made players available. Of course, the players are in town for phase one of the voluntary workouts. And by all accounts, the participation has been good. The majority of the roster is there. Mike Vrabel had his first team meeting, made his expectations pretty clear. And I thought the reaction to Vrabel's first team meeting and that video that leaked last week was interesting because I think his expectations are pretty basic, John. I mean, any head coach who takes over a program at any level of football, whether it be high school, college, or the NFL, would have similar expectations. I thought the reaction to his expectations was a bit much, if you ask me. He's not asking much from these guys other than to be on time, be professional, be courteous, and work hard. I mean, I would think that if whether you're taking over a local high school program, a local college program, or the Patriots, any coach should have the same expectations. You know that, and I know that. We're both football coaches. What he said wasn't a surprise.
Yeah, I show up and pay attention. Really is the gist of what he was
Yeah.
getting at. I don't think that's
What? How
yeah.
could he expect that
Yeah.
of them? The nerve of him.
And I think though, and it's a little bit of a larger discussion. I wonder if you would agree with this. I feel like over the past 5 or 6 years, and part of this I think is COVID, part of it's the portal, part of it's maybe a new generation. I don't know. But guys have come to the NFL less and less ready to be professionals, I think, over the last 5 or 6 years. And part of it too is the NFL's fault. Less OTAs, less time with rookies coming in, less, and that's one of the reasons too. I think offensive line play is down across the NFL because it's such a cohesive and developmental thing. There's less time to practice, less time to develop. So I think we're seeing kind of the fruits of that. So I think Vrabel setting those expectations, those might be the things that 10 years ago a coach wouldn't even have to say. And I was even like yesterday in North Carolina, I was talking to people and they were saying one of the things the players down there like about Belichick and his staff is they view it as, well, if I can't make it at UNC with Bill, I'm never going to make it in the NFL. So he's kind of setting those expectations down there. And I think that's a good thing for their program. And I think as it relates to the Patriots, we've just seen a lot of guys past 5 or 6 years to come to the NFL not fully ready yet to be pros, and there's less time with them. So I think that's where you get some of that.
And I think you're spot on here in mentioning Belichick. And I would say the same thing about Bill O'Brien at BC and Jim Moore at UConn. These guys have coached in the NFL. They have NFL experience on their staffs, specifically Boston College. They have a lot of NFL experience on their staff. So they're going to get you ready to play in the NFL. It's going to be an NFL type approach to practice, to meetings, to expectations. So if you want to get ready to play in the NFL, those are the coaches you want to play for. That's not to say that if you go play at another school for guys that haven't coached in the NFL, that you're not going to develop and put yourself in a position to get that opportunity. Of course you will. Not saying that at all. All I'm saying is, though, those programs do have an inherent advantage in terms of getting you ready because those guys have been there. You look at O'Brien at Boston College. He's been an NFL head football coach. He's run an NFL front office. He knows how to prepare a team at that level. He knows how to treat guys like pros. He knows what he looks for in players. And so he can bring that institutional knowledge to Boston College and apply it and get guys ready to play. And you mentioned that that's one of the things people are talking about in Chapel Hill about Belichick and what he's bringing to the table in that regard. So what Vrabel said is not a surprise. It's basic expectations. And look, I think that Vrabel in many ways is going to be a culture shock of sorts to people around here, specifically the media. I mean, yeah, there are a lot of people that are in this media group that covered him as a player, so they already know. But there's a lot of guys that have never covered him as a player or as a coach, including us. And there's going to be an adjustment period there. I think he's going to be very blunt. I think he's going to be very forthright. I think the transparency is going to depend on the question and the timing of it. But for the most part, it's going to be what you see is what you get. We've talked about this ad nauseum this offseason, John. It's not going to be what it was under Mayo, where they really went hard in terms of being the antithesis of Belichick. That's not going to be the case at all. Vrabel has already talked about this offseason. He talked about this a couple of weeks ago. He's his own man. He's not a Belichick guy in terms of Vrabel, the coach. He's going to do things his own way. He has his own philosophy, both schematically and in terms of culture and how to run a program. He's going to do it his way. And he's getting paid like a guy who has to do it his way. So at the end of the day, I just, again, and I'm not looking to nitpick here, I just thought that the reaction was a little interesting. It doesn't mean that he's going to be a hardo and he's going to be drawing the hard line in the sand. You telling guys, hey, you're an adult, I expect you to be on time to work, is not drawing a hard line in the sand. It's a basic expectation. You're getting paid to be there. You saying, hey, be respectful to the cooks and the trainers and the security and the people that work for the organization and work to make things better for you, that's a basic expectation. That's human decency. It's simple. Show up, go to work hard, and don't be an asshole. There's nothing that's hard about that. So, again, I just thought the reaction was, see, Vrabel, very militant. He's bringing in those high expectations. Pump the brakes, folks. They're basic expectations.
Also, too, would you rather go back to last year when they were 4-13, but somehow looked worse than the previous 4-13 team the year before? Look,
Yeah,
and you and I said this in the fall before Gerard Mayo got fired. You and I said this when Mike Vrabel got hired. What they need is a guy who can kind of find a happy medium between the stuff Belichick did that was still working the last few years and adapting to some of the changes in the league, maybe being a little bit more open. That's what they need. I think Vrabel can fit that bill. So far, it feels like he has. He's set firm expectations. He's been clear, but he's also been a little bit more open. And he said he's willing to adapt a little bit here and there. Like if a guy is going through a personal situation and needs an extra 20
yeah.
minutes when he arrives to kind of figure some stuff out, he's okay with that. Like, I think that's what they need because I think, and we don't need to beat a dead horse, but this time last year, Gerard Mayo was waiting an extra week to start the Patriots offseason program because him and the coaches weren't all on the same page. And then you get into it and they're just trying to do the opposite of everything Bill did. And it was a disaster. So I think what they've needed, and you and I have talked about this ad nauseum, is someone that can kind of take the good things Belichick did, bring their own style, and have a little bit of a happy medium between, we don't need him to be the open guy or the hot coach that Sean McVay is and the celebrity, but you don't need it to be all the way to what Bill was in 2015, right? You can find something in the middle. And I think so far, to me, I think Vrabel's done a pretty good job with that.
Yeah, and players universally have all said the same thing, that this week was really about setting the tone culturally and changing the atmosphere. It was upbeat, music in the hallways, guys, talking to the coaches one-on-one in the weight room, on the field, getting to know their position coaches, them getting to know the players. Remember, this is really the first opportunity for this new coaching staff to get around these guys and not only coach them, but get to know them as people. And I think this oftentimes gets lost, John, when it comes to football, where I think football is a little different than at least the other three major sports, is the fact that you really genuinely, you could say this about any sport, but where I think football is a little different is you're around these guys a lot, but the difference is you're playing one game a week. So you're spending a lot of one-on-one time with these guys off the field, away from the field, in non-game situations. So getting to know them, getting to know them as an athlete and how they operate and what their approach is vitally important. Because again, yes, you want to treat them like men. And I think that's where people have to realize that the difference between coaching an 18 and 22-year-old kid and coaching an NFL guy is that the NFL guy's a man. He's lived life. He's got responsibilities. He pays a mortgage. He has a wife or a girlfriend. He has kids. He has real life responsibilities. It's a lot different than coaching the 18 to 22-year-old who's got this hot shot mentality. He's the BMOC. He's the 5-star recruit. If you don't give him what he wants right out of the gate nowadays, he's already thinking about his next move and what's his next school going to be and where else can he go and play and get that opportunity. So it's a much different mindset. So in many ways, last week for Vrabel wasn't so much about setting the tone, but it was more of a get to know you, sticker with your name on your shirt type of week. Now they're really going to get into expectations, pushing these guys. They've already pushed them on the field. They've already pushed them in the weight room. We've seen some of the videos and the highlights, but they're going to ramp that stuff up now. Last week was, hey, I'm so-and-so. Nice to meet you. I've heard so many great things about you. And now it's going to be, hey, how have you been? How was your weekend? Heard a lot of great things about you again. But here's what I want to see from you. And then the following week, it's going to be, hey, we need to start working on this. We need to do this. We need you here at this time. This is our expectation. That's when you start becoming a prick as a coach, whether you're a position coach, whether you're a coordinator, whether you're Mike Vrabel. About 2 or 3 weeks in, maybe 4 weeks in, that's when you start to show your true coaching colors. These guys have been around you enough at that point that they know how you think and you operate, and that mutual respect has been established. Now it's more about, all right, now it's down to brass tacks here. Now we're going to go to work. Now this is our business relationship. We can have this personal relationship of, hey, coach, what's up, man? How you doing? Hey, brother, how you doing? How's the family? That's great. But once we walk in that weight room, once we walk on that practice field, we flip that now. It's not about how the family's doing. It's about our football family and how we could get better.
Yeah, and I think with like if you project this forward, obviously you have the draft in a week and a half, and then you're gonna have the rookies in there. You're gonna get to mini camp. They want to get to a place where I think they leave mini camp a lot more confident than they left mini camp a year ago. Like even at the end of mini camp, remember the rookies? I think it was all took that photo together. Like that was a nice moment. Don't get me wrong, but that was a team last year where you didn't know if Jacoby Brissett was going to start or Drake May was going to beat him. You didn't know the offensive line situation. You felt okay about the defense. They ended up not being good, but you felt okay at the time. Not great. And you didn't really feel great about the special teams. Now, I think right now, sitting here on April 13th, we feel much better about the Patriots than we did this time a year ago. However, they want to get from now to minicamp to a point where you feel really good about Drake May as your starting quarterback, which I think they feel good now, but you want to continue that. You want to understand what's going on the left side of your offensive line. You want to see some of these new defensive high-priced additions together and how they look and feel good about it, because I just feel like when they left minicamp last year, a lot of questions there, and it carried over into training camp. And look, they weren't a good football team to begin with, but I think those things kind of feed into each other. So you mentioned that this is the week where they kind of begin ramping it up. I mean, minicamp, believe it or not, it's 2 months away, right? It's not that long from now.
No.
So between now and then, can they build on that so we walk away from minicamp feeling better about the team, even than we do now?
And of course, moving along to some other Patriots news here, Abdul Carter scheduled to visit the team. I believe he's scheduled to visit tomorrow. That'll be interesting. Of course, Mike Vrabel and Elliot Wolf are scheduled to meet with the media on Tuesday at 1 p.m. But the Carter visit comes at an interesting time because there's, of course, a lot of speculation there, and it's that time of the year now where the slander comes out on a lot of these prospects. And, now there's information out there that Carter is a little rough around the edges. There's some character concerns, some red flags. Two-part question here for you. A, do you buy that stuff? And B, your thoughts on him visiting. Again, if you go back a week ago, it seemed like he was almost a lock to the Giants at 3 because the draft wins were starting to blow in the direction of Travis Hunter to Cleveland at 2. Shedeur Sanders is slipping, although I still think he doesn't get out of the top 10. Cam Ward 1 to Tennessee. Thoughts on Carter's visit, and do you have any concerns based on some of the stuff that's come out on him recently?
Yeah, the visit's a no-brainer, right? Because I know
he could potentially be there.
Right, because I know things are kind of trending like he might not be there, but that's not a certainty. And if he's there, your options are pretty crystallized, right? It's either take him or trade for a haul to someone that wants to draft him, right? You got two clear options. If he's not there, you and I kind of talked about this a little bit before, then all of a sudden you have all these, do you take a Camel? Do you take a McMillan? Do you reach, quote unquote, for one of the other tackles? Do you trade down, right? But if he's there, then it's kind of option A or option B. So it's a no-brainer for me to visit. The character stuff, look, I'm not saying it's not true. I just think kind of convenient timing for this to come out right now.
Every year.
And it's like it's not quite Laramie Tunsil wearing the gas mask and falling in the first round. I don't know if you remember that, but it's like that. You notice that video came out
like he's kept the gas mask off since he's been in the league.
Yeah,
he's been pretty damn good, and he's on the Hall of Fame trajectory.
But you notice that video of him that came out at a very convenient time.
It came out the day of the draft,
right? So it's like sometimes
the story broke the day before the draft, but I believe that the footage of him in the gas mask was released the day of the draft.
Yeah, and again, I'm not saying that the reporters or whatever are lying or it's made up, but it just the timing feels convenient. It feels like there's a guy. I mean, Christian Gonzalez, remember when he got all of a sudden, the Steelers might not want to take him because his meeting with them didn't go great. So he slid down, Patriots took him, and the guy's an all-pro, and for the record, a really good guy in the locker room. So it's like it feels like every year there's a guy like that somehow something like this comes up. And if he really was a problem, feel like we probably would have heard about it before mid-April, right? And this is the same guy that came back to play injured against Notre Dame and had a pretty damn good game on one arm in that semifinal playoff game. So I don't know. I mean, I have seen no evidence of it. I'll put it that way. I'm not saying it's not true. It's just I've seen no evidence. and it feels like pretty convenient timing if you're a team after pick 3 that wants him.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's pretty convenient timing too. And again, does this happen routinely when it comes to the NFL draft process and the weeks leading up to the draft? Yes, we've seen it at least every other year. A top flight prospect has some kind of a story emerge where their character's brought into question and it could impact their draft stock. I'm not sure there's enough here where he falls. I still think he goes in the top 5 unless something emerges here in the next 10 days or so to add on to some of the speculation that's out there. I don't see him falling out of the top 5 unless something serious comes up.
I don't see him falling out of the top 4. Because
Yeah,
either New England
no.
would take him at 4 or someone will trade with the Patriots to take him.
I do think, though, that if you're the Patriots, a couple of things to keep in mind here. And I feel like we've bandied about trade possibilities now all offseason. But I do think a couple of things to keep in mind here. One, I think the Shedeur Sanders situation is worth monitoring because I do think he's still going to go in the top 10. He's not going to go in the top 3 as it appears now. Of course, that could change. He's not going to go in the top 5. The only way that changes is if a team trades up. I don't think the Giants, at least based on what's being reported, it doesn't appear that the Giants are going to take him at 3. So if the Giants don't take him at 3, obviously the Patriots aren't going to take him at 4. Jacksonville's not going to take him at 5. Now it begs the question that if he does in fact go that high, does a team trade up to get him? Does a team like Vegas trade up to get him? Does a team like the New Orleans Saints, who all of a sudden have a quarterback need?
Yeah.
Derek Carr has shoulder issues. He might miss the 2025 season. Does a team like that panic and say, well, we need to get our quarterback situation in order? Yes, we have Spencer Rattler, but that's clearly not enough. We need to go up and get a quarterback. Do they mortgage some of their future and say, we believe enough in Shedeur Sanders to move up and get him? One of the things, John, that I hate about the NFL draft and I hate about this pre-draft process is the fact that guys get anointed. So the media, and I'm going to blame the media for this because I do think it's their fault. And I respect and think the world of Mel Kiper. I know people that know him. I've dealt with Mel. He's one of the nicest people in the industry. But one of the things I hate about it, and I've hated this about the draft for 25 years, is the fact that guys get anointed. Why is Shedeur Sanders the second best quarterback in this draft? Why is he labeled that by the media? And the media is not simply pulling this out of their ass. I mean, they're getting information from the teams. They're getting feedback from people around the league that they use to elevate prospects to that status. But what bothers me is, what if a team like the New Orleans Saints doesn't have him as their number 1 or 2 rated quarterback? For all we know, they could have Jackson Dart as their number 1 or 2 quarterback. They could have Tyler Shuck as their number 1 or 2 quarterback. We don't know, right? We're not privy to their draft board. Yeah. We're not in their war room. So at the end of the day, we're sitting here speculating that those teams think that highly of him. I still don't see him falling out of the top 10, but if he did, I'm not going to sit there and put my hands on my cheeks and be like, no, I'm not going to be surprised. I've talked to people around the league that have told me half the league does not see him as a top 15 pick, and there are a handful of teams that see him as a second-round pick. So do with that what you want, but that's the reality of the situation. So ideally, if you're the Patriots, that phone rings at 4 and you answer, and somebody's willing to give you draft capital this year and next year. And if that's the case, you move down. Now, if Abdul Carter is sitting there, if you believe Elliot Wolf, and Wolf has been on record as saying, we're going to take the best player available. If they're being honest, then yeah, that's Abdul Carter if he's sitting there at 4 and Travis Hunter's gone. If not, then you have to address your biggest need, which is offensive tackle.
It's funny. Every time we kind of get in this discussion about how guys are rated and all that, I always think of Marcus Davenport, who plays for the Detroit Lions now. But he was a pass rusher out of UTSA. He got drafted by the Saints in the first round in 2018. I actually think they traded up for him. And I remember at the time being like, I didn't think this guy was not on my radar to be a first or second round pick. They pick him in the mid-first round. And it's like, you know what? They thought he was like, so that's the thing. Like, we don't know how and the famous example here in New England is Cole Strange in the first round, which was a massive reach anyway. But I think it's something to note that, let's say that the Giants think Abdul Carter is a stud and the Patriots think Abdul Carter is a stud. Maybe the Raiders think he's just pretty good or really good and not a stud. Or maybe the Saints think Shadur Sanders can be a franchise quarterback of the future, and maybe the Raiders don't, and the Raiders pick in front of them. So the Raiders could say, oh, the Saints don't feel that way, so we don't have to trade up. But if they're nervous, maybe they do. So I think that's something to keep in mind, because there is that, I don't know if it's called like Blesto or whatever, like the general scouting service.
Yep.
A lot of teams use that, but not every team does. So it's something to say that, like, just because one team has a guy rated one way doesn't mean every team does. I bet you there were teams last year, John, that had Drake May ahead of Jaden Daniels. The Commanders didn't. They took Daniels. And by the way,
I did.
I also had Daniels over May, and I'm a big Daniels supporter, but I'm sure, again, there were some people, you and I discussed this quite a bit, that had May over him, and it's just
I had May as my number one quarterback in the class. I'll say this: Jane Daniels to me was a 1A. I didn't think there was a lot of separation.
Yeah, but I think the point is that the way this gets viewed sometimes is like, just because we say, oh, Cam Ward's going number one, there might be teams out there that say, hey, it's Cam Ward and then a huge gap. Or they might say, well, it's Cam Ward and then Jackson Dart's not that far behind, right? So there is some variance there.
Yeah, there is. And I'm sure there are people watching this going, oh, of course you guys had Jaden Daniels as your number one quarterback. You had him as your number one quarterback in retrospect. No. I admit I liked Drake May the best in that class. I had him as my number one quarterback. Daniels and May, to me, were neck and neck. I think if you liked Daniels more, the experience edge and the ability to play that
was my thing.
Probably would have tilted it in his favor. I've never been a big Caleb Williams guy.
We both had concern. You had more than I did, but we both had concerns about him last year.
And even with the improved offensive line, and even if they add another offensive piece like a Tyler Warren or an Austin Genty to that offense, I'm still not, and even with the hiring of Ben Johnson, I'm still not a big Caleb Williams guy, because I think at the end of the day, he tries to be too much of a street ball or too much of a Mahomes-esque kind of guy. And I still think in this league, you need guys that can be creative in their style of play and make plays in and out of the pocket. But 60 to 70% of the time, they still need to be able to play within the system. I'm not sure Caleb Williams can do that, but this isn't Bears Pulse, so we're not going to turn this into a Caleb Williams conversation. Nonetheless, and of course, we're going to continue to talk about this through next week until the draft gets here. But the Patriots do have an interesting decision to make. And I will say this, John. I know that after that win against Buffalo to end the season, a lot of people were pissed that they didn't end up with the number one pick. And many people thought that they had lost some trade leverage. And yes, certainly from a return standpoint, obviously you're talking 3 picks later. If, in fact, you do trade the number 4 pick, you're not going to get a return like you would for the number 1 pick. But I would say that they're still in a pretty good position if they decide to make a trade and trade that pick. They're still in a pretty good position, depending on who's on the other end of the phone. They're still in a pretty good position to get a good return here. Again, they may not get the return that they would have gotten had they finished 3-14 and with the number 1 pick. But if, in fact, Mike Vrabel and Elliott Wolf are comfortable trading the pick, I still think that haul could be pretty good in return. And keep one thing in mind. It's not just a team looking to come up and trade for a quarterback. It could also be a team that's looking to come up and trade for an Abdul Carter or even, dare I say, a Will Campbell. I know a lot of people are going to be like, Will Campbell, what are you talking about? Or even a Tyler Warren. My point is, I think the interest in that pick is going to be there for more than just a quarterback.
Yeah, so I have 2 thoughts on that. Number 1 is, the return is not going to be as good as if they had the number 1 pick. It also won't be as good as if they had traded last year's pick at 3 overall. But you can still get multiple day 2 picks or maybe 1 future first, depending on what they want, if you trade down. The other thing is there's this perception out there that if they trade down in the top 10, they're going to somehow not get a good player anymore because this draft isn't deep. Last year's draft was a terrific draft, and it was definitely better than this year. But to say that you won't get a really good player if you trade down in the top 10, I mean, think about if you trade down, let's just call it 4 to 10. Let's just put a round number on. You trade down to 10, which I think is the Bears, right? So let's say you trade down there. Well, you could get a Tyler Warren, an Ashton Genty, a Kelvin Banks, like Josh Simmons. All those guys could be day one starters at important positions, especially the tackles. There's this attitude out there that because this draft isn't as deep as last year, that somehow if you trade out of 4, you're not going to get a good enough player. I just don't think that's true at all. And I also think a nice piece of leverage they have is that they have those multiple third round picks. So now if you trade down, you can prioritize getting a future first or say, hey, we want a second and a fourth. So we'll have 2 seconds, 2 thirds, 2 fourths all in a row. Like they have some flexibility with those 2 thirds that I think helps. But again, this idea that they would trade down and somehow it would ruin the draft or they would not get a good player. I just think, again, the draft isn't as deep as last year. You're still going to get a great player at 8 or 9. And if you don't get a great player at 8 or 9, that's more about you and your scouting department and your front office than it is about the players. I mean, we all know the famous examples where like Jake Locker and Christian Ponder are drafted around a bunch of all pros because teams reached for them, right? Like, or N'Keal Harry going at 32 when Debo and AJ Brown went later. Like, if you don't get the good player in the first round, especially in the top 10, that's not a player thing. That's a you problem.
It is 100%. And listen, whether you end up at 6 or whether you end up at 9, there's going to be a good player on the board there that can help your organization.
There should be a great player on the board.
Yes. If you end up at 9, let's say the Saints decide that they want to trade up and they call you and say, we want to trade for the number 4 pick overall, and you negotiate a deal with them and you get it done and they move up and you drop down to 9. A guy like Kelvin Banks is going to be there. Yeah. That's a guy that could step in at 6'5", 315 and play left tackle for you this year. And while, yes, some people will say, well, he's a Vidarian Lowe clone and he's a similar player, and he is. He's got longer arms, and I think he's a little bit more athletic. I think he could step in and solidify a position of need for you. By the way, your biggest need. So at the end of the day, I agree with you 100%. You should still be able to get a quality player at pick 9 if, let's say, you orchestrate a trade with the Saints. You should still be able to get a good player there. And if you don't, that's on you. That's on your scouting. That's on your evaluation of the talent. That's your fault if you don't get a player there.
And just to put a bow on that.
And I don't think that Mike Vrabel, by the way, if that scenario played out, John, and they don't get a great player there, I'm sure Vrabel and Wolf will be criticized for it. But to your point, that's an organizational F-up. That's not anyone else's fault. You make that deal and you move down, you better have a board where you are comfortable with who could be on the board at that point, and you better be willing to take them.
Yeah, and just to put a bow on that, when you look at some of the examples of them trading down in the last 20 years, in 2008 from 7 to 10, and they got Gerard Mayo at 10, like the guy was there. Or 2010, they traded down twice, drafted Devin McCourty, like the guy was there. 2023, they trade down and get Christian Gonzalez. The guy is there. So to say that you'll trade down to 8 and there won't be good guys, you could trade down to 8 and get Tyler Warren. Like that guy's going to be there, and he's going to be an all-pro tight end, I think. So again, if you trade down, especially if you stay in the top 10, and the guy you pick is a bust, that's a you problem. That's not a guy in the top 10 problem.
Yeah, a guy like Tyler Warren is a great example because he could go anywhere from 4 to the Patriots. I don't think it's hyperbole.
No, I don't think it's hyperbole either.
To say that they could take him there. So he could go anywhere from 4 to the Patriots all the way down to 10 to Chicago. I don't think he gets out of the top 10. But I think an even bigger point here is a guy like Ashton Genty is a guy to keep an eye on because Genty is the type of guy that I could see Jacksonville taking at 5. People will say, well, they have Travis Etienne and they paid him. Fine. But I could see them taking a guy like him. And all of a sudden, the Raiders pass up on a Warren, which they will because they have Brock Bowers. So they pass up on a Warren. All of a sudden, the Jets pass up on a Warren. Next thing you know, let's say, again, you orchestrate this trade with the Saints, hypothetically, you're sitting there at 9. You talk about best player available. At that point in the draft, if you don't think Banks is worth taking at 9 if he's sitting there, then Tyler Warren is the proverbial best player on the board. You take him then and you add a really nice chess piece to your offense. Ken Matthias checks in. Thanks for checking in, Ken, with the draft less than 2 weeks away. Where is this team's headspace with what they do at 4? And is it still possible for them to move down and get more draft capital? Well, Ken, we've been talking about this here for the last few minutes.
I think it's possible. Yeah.
But to answer your question, yes, I
Yeah.
absolutely think it's
Yeah,
possible.
and I'm
Thanks for
leaning
checking in,
towards.
by the way.
Yes, thanks, Ken. I'm leaning towards that being on a sliding scale, maybe the most likely. And again, it's like a 51-49 thing, but I'm leaning a little bit more towards they trade down at 4 over taking a guy.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm starting to lean that way too. I don't think we're going to get much insight on Tuesday as to what they're going to do and why would they do that. But I agree with you, John. I'm leaning in that direction too, because I think having Abdul Carter in makes a ton of sense. There's a strong possibility he could be there at 4. But man, I think that the trade winds are starting to blow more here, and I think that it is a distinct possibility that they do make a deal. Adam Glazer joins us. He says, how are we doing, fellas? Good morning, Adam. Thanks for checking in. Appreciate you, man. Good friend Lauren Gaudette. We haven't heard from Lauren in a while.
Lauren, welcome back.
Of the season. Welcome back. She says, I agree with you guys on the talent level of the draft, but I also think that a top 5 pick can bring a level of pressure. But I also feel the 7 through 9 spot is usually a better spot for most teams. Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming when it comes to pressure, Lauren is talking about expectations.
Yeah, I get what she's saying, but if you're picking in the top 5 and the guys that you pick stinks, again, that's a you like if the Patriots had picked Drake May last year and Drake May stunk, that would be a Patriots problem, not a you target a guy so Lauren's right in that if you target a guy in the top 5 and he's a bust, it does reflect because you don't have the excuse of, oh, the guy we wanted was gone or so-and-so wasn't there. Like he's there in the top 5. But again, if you're at 4, you should be able to find a great player. And if you trade down to 8 or 9, you should also be able to. It's not like you're trading down from 4 to 45. Like you should be able to find a great player in the top 10.
Lauren checks back in again and again. Thank you for checking in, Lauren. It's great to hear from you. Appreciate it as always. She says, I asked this. I see a lot of Travis Hunter talk on the social medias. The social medias, I like that. That is such a term that like a 65-year-old man would use. I was on the social medias. The internets, and I find the discussion interesting. Do you go flashy or true need with a solid but good player? I prefer Abdul Carter, the best first or second OT on the board. I don't think, in my opinion, I agree with you, Lauren. I don't think, in my opinion, you could go wrong with a Carter or a Will Campbell even. And again, I know Patriot fans have mixed feelings about Will Campbell because of the wingspan and the arm length stuff. I don't think you can go wrong with either one of those guys, John. I think if you're looking to make a safe pick that could be productive, I think those 2 guys would be solid picks. Because here's the thing. You can't go wrong with an Abdul Carter, in my opinion, because I don't think there's going to be a ton of pressure on him as a rookie to step in and have to overproduce. I think if he ends up in a Cleveland at 2 and even the Giants at 3, even though they have Brian Burns, I think there's going to be a higher expectation for him to produce there. I think here there's going to be an obvious expectation to produce, but with Milton Williams, you get a healthy Christian Barmore, you have Harold Landry, you have Kayvon Chason. They have enough pass rushing capability here that he could be a rotational piece that develops as a pass rusher with this team. He doesn't have to. It'd be nice if he came in and made an immediate impact, but he doesn't necessarily have to be the guy right out of the gate. Same thing with Campbell. If he doesn't make it at left tackle, push comes to shove, you kick him inside the left guard, and now, in my opinion, you set yourself up to have an all-pro left guard. Bottom line is I think those 2 guys are safe picks, and I think those 2 guys would make a lot of sense. The question is, do the fans see those 2 guys as safe picks? And it looks like we lost John. Not sure why, but let's see what's going on with our good friend. He did text me. Technical difficulties. He's signing back in ASAP. So, Lauren, I agree with you. I think at the end of the day, I think either one of those players would be a safe pick. But I will say this, and John and I have been talking about this a bunch. I will say this. I do think that the pull and the allure of making a trade is there. And I think at the end of the day, if the right offer comes along, I do think that the Patriots are going to be willing to make that deal, and they should make that deal. I mean, look, you've got 9 picks in this draft. If you can add a couple more picks in this draft and even a future draft pick next year, even if it's not a first round pick, that's a pretty good haul to move down 5 spots. You can get a good player. Let's say somehow they finagle a 2, a 3, and a later round pick to move down 5 spots. Although I think they could do better than that. I do think that they could potentially land a future first out of that deal. But let's say they don't place a premium on that. Let's say, you know what? No, we're comfortable with the idea of taking a high second round pick this year, high third round pick, and maybe a 6th round pick this year and a second or a third next year. So we add another pick to our 2026 draft stash. I think if that's the case, you might want to make that deal, because now if you have an additional 3 picks to work with in this draft, now you have enough compensation where you can move back into the first round on April 24th. And if there's a guy there you like, let's say you go Will Campbell at 9, he falls, or Tyler Warren at 9, and all of a sudden now you have that extra second round pick to play with. Maybe you put 38 on the table to a team that's picking in the 26 to 32 range, and you say, hey, we want to move back in. How about we give you 38 and a third and our 4th, or whatever, our 5th, and we move into the first round? Maybe then you can do that and you end up getting a player you like. Again, all things that we are going to talk about here ad nauseum for the next 10 plus days in terms of scenarios. All right, John, you're back.
Yes.
I held the fort. I sat here and talked about trade scenarios and the importance of draft capital. But the bottom line here is, again, Carter, Campbell, safe picks. But, man, the opportunity to trade down, still get a good player, and add that additional capital is awfully enticing.
Yeah, I would agree. And this is something you and I feel like have been talking about since November, that the trade down scenario for the long-term outlook of the franchise is probably the best thing. And don't get me wrong, if they take Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter or Will Campbell at 4, those guys are going to be great players in the NFL. It's just a matter of, I think you can get more capital, still get a great player in the top 10, and then get some more good players in the second and third round, potentially a future first. And again, for a team that's where they're at, which I think this year we look at a team that can win maybe 8 or 9 games, compete for a playoff spot, but really next year be a legit good team to go deep in the playoffs. That's the type of capital you want, I think, for a team like that.
Ken checks back in. Ken's throwing a wrench into all this. If they do stand pat, who would you guys like to see them get? We've already talked about Carter and Warren. We mentioned Genty. I'd be shocked if they took Ashton Genty.
Yeah, at 4, I don't see that.
I don't see that either. I don't see that either, even in a trade down situation, unless they look at the board and they say to themselves, he truly is the best player available. And you know what? We want to form a dynamic duo in the backfield. Could I see that? Yeah, I think the fans would be excited about that. I'm not sure how much more it would move the needle. But the wrench that Ken throws in all this is, what if Hunter slips to 4? Now, we've talked a lot about Travis Hunter and the possibility of them taking him at 4. I'm still going to maintain what I've said all offseason, that I think if he's there at 4, he's in play.
Yeah, I think he's in play. I'd still rather trade down. And here's the thing with Hunter. If he comes here, he's playing receiver. He's not going to play corner over Gonzalez. Yeah. They just gave Carlton Davis a bunch of money. And I'm not saying he won't play any defense, but he's primarily going to be a receiver. And I bet you within 2 years, he'll be the best receiver on your team, maybe by the end of the year, depending on how Stephon Diggs is. So he's going to be a great player. I just think if you're going to take Hunter at 4, you sure as hell better have a second round left tackle or a late first left tackle you can trade up for to get, because your left side of the offensive line is a real question mark. Like, we talk all the time about left tackle. I mean, who's your left guard? Is it Cole Strange? Is it Layden Robinson? And maybe one of those guys can be it. Jake Andrews is another one, but you don't know for sure. You want to have at least one of those positions solidified going into training camp. So again, and it's same philosophy with Abdul Carter, right? Like, I like those guys. If you're going to take one of those guys there, or even if you're going to trade down and take a Tyler Warren at 7 or 8 or 9, you better know what you're doing at left tackle, either later in the first round or in the second. Because, John, if they exit the first 2 rounds without a left tackle selected, I'm going to be pretty upset, and I think they're going to be worse off for it.
Yeah, and they're going to deserve criticism at that point, in my opinion. Ken, thanks for checking in. You are watching Patriots Pulse. I'm your host, John Sarianides. We've got about 15 minutes left here in the show. As always, I'm joined by my partner, WEI's John Lyons. And Dennis Monahan checks in. Thanks for checking in, Dennis. Can you discuss the 2 or 3 best local college players entering the draft? And what organizations do you think they would fit best? Well, I think the number one player in our top 50, and we're going to unveil it this week heading into the draft, the number one player in our local top 50 is Donovan Ezaraku, edge pass rusher from Boston College, a guy that I think is going to go in the first round. And, Bill O'Brien talked about this yesterday after the final spring practice at Boston College. He was asked about Donovan, and the thing that he said that I think really stuck with me and it resonated with me about Donovan is that he believes that Donovan is mature enough and professional enough to walk into any building, be a pro, and be productive. So it doesn't matter where he gets drafted, what the city is, the kid is mature enough, talented enough to walk in and make a difference for that organization. So Donovan Ezaraku is the best player in New England, the best draft prospect in New England. Number 2 draft prospect is Ozzie Trapillo, right tackle, who could potentially play left tackle, also out of Boston College. You're talking about 6'8", 320 pounds, really good feet, good vertical length. He does need to work on sustaining blocks and being more of a natural bender, but I think if he does that, that puts him on a track where he could potentially play left tackle. I've said this to people, John. I know that he's being pegged as a right tackle, but I think Trapillo can play left tackle as well. The athleticism, length, and footwork are certainly there. His wingspan will be questioned. He's on the shorter arm side of things, but his arms aren't so short that it's going to be an issue. He's over 33 inches.
Yeah, and Ezaraku, to the question about where do they fit best, the answer is anywhere, to be honest with him. But I look at Minnesota at pick 24. Brian Flores' defense, they gave a lot of good quarterbacks a lot of trouble last year. And towards the end of the season, again, I think that loss to Detroit, especially at the end of the season, that was more about Sam Darnold seeing ghosts. But it felt too like they were lacking that one little bit of defensive punch, that one spark. I don't want to say the phrase blue chip, but that one guy. And I think Ezaraku could go to Minnesota and could kind of be that guy in a Brian Flores defense. So look, he
would be a monster in that.
And I agree. And he could fit at Detroit, pick 28. I think Detroit might go corner. He could fit with Green Bay at 23. I know they've had many good pass rushers over the year, but I really look at Minnesota at pick 24. I would love that fit for Ezaraku.
Yeah, and our number 3 prospect, in my opinion at least, is Chase Lunt, right tackle out of UConn. I don't think Lunt can play left tackle, but I definitely think he has starter potential at right tackle. I also think he can kick inside and play right guard. A couple of other prospects to keep an eye on in the area. Cam Horsley, defensive tackle, also from Boston College, guy that can play the 2-eye or the shade on the weak side, but I also think in sub packages can kick over to the 3 technique and play on that side. He's had a really good pre-draft process. A couple of guys that are flying under the radar to also keep an eye on. Cam Arnold, who had a really good pro day at Boston College on March 24th. Another guy, hybrid outside linebacker, safety type. Reminds me a little bit of Marte Mapu in terms of his versatility and some things that he can do. He's also a Boston College guy. Drew Kendall, a guy who can Pete's son. He can go early on day 3. He's a guy to keep an eye on. Of course, his dad was an all-pro center and guard in the NFL, played at Boston College, later went on to play for the Seattle Seahawks and the New York Jets. He's a player to keep an eye on as well, also out of Boston College. Then a couple of guys that are going to fly under the radar that are probably late round potential undrafted free agent types. I really like Josiah Silver out of UNH, edge type. Explosive first step, a guy that can close and play up and down the line of scrimmage. He's a name to keep an eye on. And then a couple of other guys that I've been really impressed with going back to Boston College. Neto Okpala, who played opposite Donovan Ezaraku. Another guy, the numbers weren't there last year. He wasn't what we thought he was going to be statistically, but another player to keep an eye on, running back Trayshawn Ward as well. Another player to keep an eye on. And just going back to UConn,
I like Kai Robichaux too, out of that back.
Yeah.
And I think Kai Robichaux's a guy.
I think he's more of a timeshare guy that can be that short yardage goal line guy.
You took the words out of my mouth. I think he's a guy that would need to be like a running back by committee or part of a duo. But if he's one half of a duo, I think you could have yourself a pretty good running back room if you had a legit guy to pair with him. So he's probably a late day 3 guy. But I think, again, in the right role, I think he could carve out a nice career for himself in the NFL.
A couple of other names to keep an eye on going back to UConn, Valentin Sen, who was their left tackle, multi-year starter, guy that I think can play right tackle in the NFL. Jelani Stafford, another 2-eye shade type defensive tackle who's quick twitched and can make plays along the line of scrimmage. They also have a receiver named TJ Sheffield to keep an eye on. I'll give you the name of a UMass guy to keep an eye on. He tested out of his mind at their pro day. Wide receiver Jacoby Keeney James had a big day at his pro day, at UMass's pro day on March 26th. He ran a 4.37. I talked to a couple of scouts that said that he went from being a guy that they weren't even entertaining putting on their big draft board to now being a guy that they could see potentially going late in day 3. So with that kind of speed, he would have been top 10 statistically in a lot of the combine numbers at the actual combine. Jacoby Keeney James made himself some money on his pro day. He's a guy that's got some pretty good size at 6 feet and change, a couple 100 pounds, really good route runner, smooth, explosive after the catch. Don't be surprised if that one team falls in love with him and takes him. Dennis, thanks for checking in. We love talking about the local draft prospects. We'll have a bunch of stuff out on them as well here in the next few days. So thanks again for checking in, and make sure you come back. We appreciate your viewing the show. Ken checks back in. Would you guys be disappointed if the Patriots don't trade back into the first round and just end up with the number 4 pick? No, I wouldn't. Because again, as we said earlier, if a Carter or a Campbell are there and you take one of them, I'm okay with it. The Campbell take's not going to sit well with a lot of people because of the wingspan stuff, but I'd be okay with it because I think even if you slide him inside, John, I think he's going to be okay. I think you're going to get a good football player out of it.
Yeah, I think Campbell's going to have a great career. Just the career-defining question is a guard or tackle, right? But I think the idea, like he's going to be a great player. I wouldn't be disappointed to Ken's question. What I will say, though, is if they don't get a tackle with their first pick, I would want them to trade back into the first round. Late, and again, it can be pick 28 with Detroit or pick 29 and get a left tackle there. And then because you get a 5th-year option with it and you make sure you get the guy. Because waiting all the way from pick 4 to pick 38 to get a left tackle, like there's a lot of guys, whether it's Josh Simmons, Calvin Banks, Josh Connerly, even Wyatt Millam, we'll see where he goes. There's a lot of guys that are good players that could be left tackles that are going to be gone, I think, by pick 38. So it kind of is dependent on what they do with that 4th pick. But so I wouldn't say I'd be disappointed. I just want to make sure they walk away from the first 2 rounds with a left tackle.
Yeah, and look, there should be a couple of those guys that fall into the top of the 2nd round, but to your point, there's a good chance that there'll be a run on that position early on day 2, and they could be gone. And I do think a couple of those guys are going to go earlier than we think. Like a guy like Ozzie Trapillo, he could sneak into the first round. I know that people are going to probably look at me and say, no chance. People in the football world, at least. I call bullshit. I think he could. I really do. Remember, and I've said this for 25 years, when it comes to the NFL draft, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Just because the media and just because other organizations don't think a player is as good as you do doesn't mean you're not going to take that player. Case in point, Patriots in 2022 with Cole Strange. They took him. They took him when some teams had him as a 3rd-round pick on their board. A lot of teams had him as a middle to late 2nd-round pick. Belichick said, screw conventional wisdom. We have a need. I may not draft for need, but I like the player. I like his size. I like his versatility. We're going to take him. Now, in hindsight, yeah, you can make the argument that was a bad pick, John. But at the end of the day, all it takes is one team to like a player, to fall in love with the player, and he ends up in their organization.
Yeah, and I think, like, to your point on Trapillo, even if he doesn't go in the first round, let's say he goes to 36, that's still before you at 38, right? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the thing. Like, that's
I think he's going to be off the board by 38.
And well, that's my concern, is that if they just stay at 4 and 38, if you don't get the tackle at 4, There'll be tackles available at 38, but I think the drop off in quality you're going to
Yeah.
see because I just think a lot of these guys are going to go in the teens to 20s to early 30s, and that's where they could get in a little bit of trouble. And this is the issue they've had in the past where it felt like they've kind of waited around to take offensive linemen, and some of them, like Mike Onwenu, has worked out really well, right? Other guy, David Andrews, who just left town, undrafted free agent, worked out really well. But then a lot of the other ones they've waited around for haven't always worked out, especially at premium positions. I mean, John, the 3 left tackles they had in the dynasty were all first round picks. Matt Light, Nate Solder, and Trent Brown wasn't a first round pick by San Fran, right? He was
No, he
late.
wasn't.
No, but 2 of the 3 were first
Were.
round picks. And the other guy was a guy they went out and sought and brought in. So, and it would have been Isaiah Wynn, except he got hurt, which opened the door for Trent Brown. So again, it's something like that position specifically, I don't think you want to wait around for.
No. And I do think Ozzy Trapillo's window is anywhere from 25 to 45. I really think that's his window. So we'll see. All right. Last segment here before we wrap up. Let's do a quick draft preview. We're going to talk about the wide receiver position. Of course, this position is all of a sudden not as much of a need as it was, let's say, 2 weeks ago, even with the addition of Stephon Diggs. You also bring in Mac Hollins in free agency. So Mike Vrabel, Elliott Wolf have beefed up the wide receiver position. All of that being said, John, I still think it's a position that they should address on day 2. Obviously, you're not going to take a receiver on day 1, regardless of what they do with pick 4. I do think, however, they should take one on day 2. I'm going to give you some names of guys that I like. Who are some of the guys that you like that could be in play for them, either day 2 or 3?
Yeah, so for me, first of all, I will say day 1, I think is a possibility if they
trade back in.
If they have multiple first round picks, right? Like if they
Good
only
point.
pick one guy, it's not going to be a receiver. But if they trade down and take a Ted McMillan and then trade back into the first round and take a tackle there or something, something like that. Like I think they're going to trade down, take Tyler Warren, and then take a tackle later. But that's a different position. I know. My point is, if they have multiple first round
and if you take a Tyler Warren, then you're de-emphasizing receiver. In
I agree with that too. Right. And I agree.
Yeah.
So I think, to me, day 1 is only in play if they make multiple first round picks. I think it's a day 2. I think it's a day 2 thing. I look at those second round picks they have. Of course, they have 2 given the Falcons trade for Matt Judon in the summer. So
the third round picks.
Yeah, sorry, what did I say? Second, my bad.
Yeah.
So
it'd be nice if they had 2 second round picks.
It would be, wouldn't it? Right.
Yeah.
So look, I look at those 2 third round picks is where you're going to see, I think, them go receive. Now, John, you know it. My favorite guy, and I have him mocked to them, Trey Harris out of Ole Miss, 6'2", 205, can play the X. And what I like about him, dude missed 5 games last year, still had 1,000 yards receiving. He can win with speed, win with physicality. I like him off the line. His routes need a little bit of work, but I think they're better than people give it credit. I think sometimes people think his routes aren't that good, and I disagree. I think they're pretty good. They just need some work. So I like him a lot. I mean, Matthew Golden is a guy I think we both like. I just don't think he's going to be there in round 2. Jaden Higgins is a possibility, I think, in round 2 for them. Maybe early round 3 if they move around a little bit. Isaiah Bond, I love the speed. I just don't know how polished of an overall NFL receiver he'll be. So that could be like a round 4, round 5 guy if he's still there. I just think his speed is going to get him picked earlier than round 4 just based on the trade alone. So the guy number 1 on
his stock might drop, though. He's had some legal issues here in the past week. Reported legal issues. We don't want to start
fair.
Something that's true. We don't want to speak about a situation that we have no information on, but there was a report that there was some kind of an issue there. So I don't know how much that impacts his draft stock, depending on what information teams get. It may and may not, but he's a talented player nonetheless.
I also, one other guy.
We hope he goes high.
Yeah, one other guy, and this is probably more of a second round, is Alec Ayamanor, the Stanford receiver.
Yeah, he's intriguing.
Yeah,
big X receiver that can play, that can be a difference maker in the red zone.
And Stanford, not good in recent years, right? We all remember them with Andrew Luck and Jim Harbaugh and early David Shaw. That has not been a good football team, and he has still been really productive for them. He had 63 catches last year, 830 yards. Again, in an offense that's not that good. So if they want to go receiver in the second round, I think it's him or Higgins. If they wait till the third, though, I think Trey Harris, he's my favorite of the group, and I think he'll be there with one of their third-round picks. So I would like to see them go that route. But if they want it earlier, those are my two guys.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of the guys that I like for them as well. I'll throw a couple of other names out there. I really like Jack Besh out of TCU.
Yeah, Senior Bowl MVP,
Senior Bowl
right?
MVP. Yeah, he lost his brother, Tiger Besh, who played at Princeton during the attacks in the French Quarter on New Year's Eve. Sad story, but I really like Besh. Really productive player at TCU. Big receiver, can play the Z, can play the F, can also play the X. He's a guy that offers alignment versatility, and the Patriots love that, especially with Josh McDaniels back. Another name to keep an eye on, Luther Burden.
Yeah.
By all accounts, a couple of scouts I spoke to about a week and a half ago said the prevailing thought around the league now is he's probably going to go anywhere from 25 to 40. He could potentially be there at 38. Really productive player at Mizzou the last 2 years. Another guy that offers alignment versatility, and then he can play the Z and the F. So another name to keep an eye on. A guy who early on in the draft process, even going back to before last season, was profiling as a top 10 pick. His stock has steadily declined. Some injury issues there, but he is one of the more talented receivers in terms of pure talent in this draft. Again, I still see him going in the first, but with the emergence of a guy like Matthew Golden, he could fall out of the first round. I'm with you on Trey Harris and Jaden Higgins, like both of those guys. And as far as some other guys to keep an eye on, Jalen Noel out of Iowa State, speed guy that can play the Z or the F. Another guy that the Patriots have had some interest in. Of course, they've met with a lot of these players in the pre-draft process. Jalen Royals, a wide receiver from Utah State. Another name to keep an eye on. Theo Weiss, another Missouri guy, formerly of Oklahoma. Another name to keep an eye on. So Kyle Williams from Washington State, the guy that
I'd
I think
also
would
add
be,
one other name, Jalen Lane out of Virginia Tech. And
Yeah.
he's in another offense, not that good, slot guy, but he returned 24 punts last year, 10-yard average. And that's something that if Marcus Jones is going to play a bigger role on defense, probably going to have fewer punt returns from him. And I wouldn't be surprised, John. I know they had 2 rookie receivers last year. I know Demario Douglas only his 3rd year. I would not be surprised if they walk away from this draft with 2 receivers, one on day 2, and then another one either round like 7 or one of their first few undrafted free agents. I think McDaniels and Vrabel are going to want to add a couple new faces to that room, because even Diggs, we've talked about this, that's a 1 or 2 year thing. Stephon Diggs here, 3 max. So I think they're going to want to add at least a couple new young faces into that room.
Yeah, I think they need to add some speed. I think that's the thing.
Yeah.
You know, we could sit here and say whatever we want about Demario Douglas and Polk and Baker from last year, but none of those guys, even Douglas is quick in space, and he's a guy that could separate and pick up yards after the catch, but he's not a guy that's going to finish plays. He's not a game breaker, if you will.
Yeah.
And I think they need that. I want to see them draft speed. Before they signed Diggs, I was more into them finding that big X receiver that can be an X factor on the backside of trips and be an X factor in the red zone. But I really do think, John, we're living in an era now where teams are really doing more out of the slot vertically with slot fades and isolation routes. I want to see them find a guy that can give them a matchup advantage there, but with some size. Demario Douglas can do some nice things from about 15 yards to the line of scrimmage, but you need a guy that can take the top off of coverage, especially once you get into plus territory. I don't think they have that guy right now. It's obviously not going to be the 2 free agents they brought in, and there isn't any guy returning that could be that guy. I want to see them come out of this draft with that guy. They need that. Lauren checks back in. She loves Pat Bryant. I did too. I did in the beginning of the process. I'm not sure testing-wise he did enough, though, to be a guy that they should draft. Jalen Royals, I mentioned him out of Utah State. I agree with you, Lauren. I like him there. I'm going to say something, though, that you guys may not agree with, our people that have commented, or you, Mr. Lyons. I could also see them coming out of this draft without a receiver.
So here's my thing on that. I think if they do that, it's because they invest heavily in tight end. Like they draft a tight end in the 1st or 2nd round.
Or running back.
Even if though running back, I don't think they go running back the first.
No,
I get what you're saying. I look at this draft as Stephon Diggs is a guy defenses have to game plan around. Patriots haven't had that guy in the passing game in several years. But you want to come out of this draft with a young player you think can be that guy. Because again, Diggs is only going to be a couple year thing. Now, maybe they think it's Jalen Polk and McDaniels and Vrabel just think, hey, this guy was poorly coached last year and had bad quarterback play the first half of the year. That could be it. But I would be surprised if they come out of this draft with no receivers. To me, that means they would have had to have gone tight end either in the first or second round. And that's how they're going to build this offense, which was in many years with McDaniels. That's what they did. Gronk was the priority for many of those years, even under Charlie Weiss. I mean, Troy Brown had 101 catches in 01, but Jermaine Wiggins was a big part of that offense. Ben Watson became a big part of their offense after he was drafted. So that wouldn't be a new thing. I just think, again, if you don't get a receiver, it's because you went tight end high. If you don't go tight end high and you don't get a receiver, I wouldn't agree with that by them.
Yeah, it's interesting because another guy we haven't mentioned is Tet McMillan. Now, again, another guy that's been smeared the last couple of weeks. The video surfaced of him saying he doesn't like to watch film and all. And listen, there's going to be about 5 teams in the league that aren't going to give 2 shits that he said that. Let's be honest here. Okay?
Yeah, there's also
because they're going to bring him into their building
that don't like watching film.
Right. We've coached plenty of players in our career at the high school and college level that hated watching film. Okay. Most players don't like watching film. The rare breed that does, those are the guys that are usually good to great. But the majority of players don't like sitting in team film sessions. They don't like sitting in positional film sessions. And they sure as hell aren't going to watch film on their own. So Tet McMillan just came out and said the quiet part out loud. He didn't say anything that should impact his draft stock, in my opinion. Like I said, I still think there are going to be 5 teams out there that are going to like him enough that they're going to want to draft him. Are the Patriots one of those teams? To wrap up this week's show, could he be in play for them at pick 9, let's say? And again, this is all hypothetical. They make a trade with New Orleans. They end up at 9. Could he be in play if they trade down?
Pick 4, no. Pick 9, yes, in play, but I wouldn't take him over Tyler Warren. So would he be in play? Yes. And also, to be fair, and this is not really an anti-Tet thing, I wouldn't take him over Kelvin Banks, I think, either, or Josh Simmons. Because, like, if one of those guys is there and you can say, hey, I'm going to plug and play a left tackle for 8 years, I'm going to take that guy over a receiver.
That would be a Tet offensive if they did that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's good.
Little military history joke.
Pretty good, John. Pretty good. Yeah. I'll give you that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think if Tyler Warren is sitting there in a trade down situation, I'm not passing on him to take Tet McMillan, especially because it's wide receiver. I say it every year, and I've said this especially in the last 5 to 10 years covering the draft. Wide receivers fall off trees now. They're being developed at an astronomical rate because of the spread offense, because guys playing wide receiver at a younger age now, because of 7-on-7s and all these 7-on-7 tournaments and all these 7-on-7 leagues. Wide receivers are being developed at a rate we've never seen before. That position is always going to be deep. It's going to be deep in every draft. So you don't have to overdraft receivers. You can draft quality, productive players that can step into your system and produce in any round in a draft. Now, the problem is the Patriots haven't drafted good receivers. So the Patriots are kind of an anomaly in all this. But if you do your homework and you take the right player, and that's always the question, regardless of the depth of a position, you should be able to get some production out of the receiver position if you do it right. It's the closest thing to a safe bet in the NFL draft as there is.
Yeah, and I think you can get
and yet the Patriots have sucked at it.
Yeah, it is such an irony. You can get a good receiver in round 2 or 3, and I think that's what's going to happen. Really, I mean, I think that is going to be, and also too, I feel like after Tet McMillan and Matthew Golden and then Egbuka, there's kind of not a huge gap.
Got Emeka Egbuka. I love Emeka Egbuka.
Yeah, but
if Emeka Egbuka sitting there at 38, you run that card up, especially if you go tackle with your 4th pick.
Yeah, I just think between those 3 guys, there's a little bit of a gap. So you can wait until the 3rd round and get a good player at receiver. So yeah, I also think too, if you're going to draft a receiver in the 1st round, your O-line better be all set. And like that, to me, I'd put that first.
Yeah, I agree. All right, final thoughts here. We went a little over today, but Thanks to all who are watching the show and checked in. We appreciate you guys, and we encourage you guys, if you're watching the show, go in and comment. We want to hear from you. We want to talk football with you. We want to talk Patriots with you. Check in. We love hearing from you guys. We know you have a lot of options out there, but we truly take pride in being a show that's for the fans. We want you to check in. We care about your opinion. We want to hear your opinion. So go ahead and check in. Final thoughts, John.
Yeah, final thought. I mean, I feel like every week I say we're a week closer to the draft. Now it's only a week and a half away,
Yep.
and it's starting again. It's Patriots are kind of in an interesting spot here with what's going to happen in 4. I wouldn't be surprised, John, if in the course of this week we start to get some firm answers on what 2 and 3 is looking like, because the reporting has been trending in that direction of Hunter and Carter at 2 and 3. Wouldn't be shocked if by the time we do the show next week, if we have at least one firm answer on those two guys, if not both.
And one final question here from Ken. And again, thanks for checking in, Ken. If the Patriots don't nail this draft with talent, what would it say about its scouting department and their evaluations on players looking ahead to the future? I think
it's a big problem.
It's a big problem. I don't know how much of it you're going to put on Vrabel. The one thing I will say, and it's a very good question, Ken, and again, thanks for checking in. I think the one thing you could see, however, is you could see a cleaning of the house of sorts, if you will, in their front office if this draft doesn't pan out. I think,
agree completely.
I think you're going to see a lot of people ushered out if that's the case.
Yeah, I agree totally.
Yeah, as do I. All right, and finally, Lauren checks back in. They're coming in fast and furious. We have to end this thing at some point, folks. If I needed a wide receiver, I'm more inclined to sign Ibuka over McMillan, but both solid and potential great pros.
Different guys.
I think you mean draft.
Yeah, I think it depends. Like, to me, Tet's more of an X guy. Ibuka, Golden, I think they're more Z's and kind of. So I think it kind of depends.
And I think Ibuka and Golden are guys that can play the Z, the F.
Yeah.
The F, of course, is your slot receiver. They're your third receiver. They
Yeah.
can, they offer more scheme versatility. McMillan's more of your traditional backside X receiver, who, again, Elliott Wolf came out the start of the offseason and said the Patriots are in the market for that guy. So you could see them go receiver early at some point in day 2, and that guy could be one of these big X receivers. So we'll see. Lauren, thanks for checking in. We appreciate it. All right. Well, that'll do it for this long, drawn-out episode of Patriots Pulse for this week. Hard to believe, John. Next week is Easter. Next Sunday is Easter. We do have one more episode before the draft. We are trying to figure out when we're going to schedule that and put that out there. We'll let you guys know. But I promise you, we will have a pre-draft episode, and we're going to do our Patriots Pulse mock draft during that episode. So that'll be coming your way next week. That will do it for this week's episode of Patriots Pulse. For John Lyons, I'm John Sarianides. Till next week, have a happy and safe week, and happy Palm Sunday.